And that includes the students. Come on over. Don't be shy. Come get recognized. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm Bill Cavanaugh. I'm a professor here of Catholic Studies and director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology. I did a radio interview this morning where they called it the Center for World Catholicism and Intellectual Theology. And I thought, well, that's a little step up anyway. So, but we are. It's better than the other kind of whatever the non-intellectual. Anyway, We are a research center here at DePaul focused on the church in the global south, so Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we've been doing these conferences, the World Catholicism Week, which is now down to 2 days because of budget cuts, but we're still going strong. World Catholicism Week conferences, this is actually the 17th year of that, and we have a whole book series of books that have come out of the conference. And we had the idea a few years ago to try to incorporate student research, undergraduate research, into what we're doing with the conference. So every year we gather people from around the world to talk about one particular issue, and we thought, let's get the students involved here and get meeting people from all around the world as well, and the students have stepped up and done a wonderful job. So the theme for this year's conference is hope. And Pope Francis chose the theme of hope for this year's Jubilee year because it seems in short supply these days, right? There's a lot of anxiety and cynicism and despair about what's going on in the country and the world. So we're gathering scholars and activists from around the world to talk about finding hope under these circumstances with the recognition that hope is not the same as optimism, right? An optimist says, it's not so bad, things are getting better. And a hopeful person looks directly at the darkness, but doesn't let the darkness have the final word, right? Stubbornly kind of refuses to give in to it. So that's what we're about in this conference and in this session. So I want to introduce the three respondents to the students' work. Emmanuel Katongole, come join us up here. He's an old friend of ours here at DePaul and at the center. He is a Catholic priest from Uganda, PhD from Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, and the author of many terrific books, two of which he worked at here at DePaul, right? It's The Sacrifice of Africa and Born from Lament, Sacrifice of Africa, one of my favorite books of political theology, and Born from Lament, which is about hope and lament in Africa. So Mina Cho from Georgetown University, researcher, educator, specializing in constructive theology and Christian spirituality. She teaches in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown, and her work engages with the Christian mystical tradition, post-colonial theory, Asian and Asian American religion, and so on. And her latest book is called The Silent God and the Silenced, Mysticism and Contemplation Amid Suffering. So welcome to Mina, and our final respondent, Yara González-Justiniano, is assistant professor of religion psychology and culture at Vanderbilt University. She is a practical theologian and a minister in the Disciples of Christ Church. She received a PhD from Boston University School of Theology, and also a BA from the University of Puerto Rico, where she double majored in theater and modern languages and not theology. Right? Her most recent book is called Centering Hope as a Sustainable Decolonial Practice, Esperanza en Práctica, Hope in Practice, where she does theology together with ethnography amongst churches in Puerto Rico. So please join me in welcoming our three respondents. And you now have the floor. I'm going to give this, so if you want to maybe just each one of you go one at a time. Mina, if you want to start, do one of your students, and then we'll kind of go rotating like that. Thank you.
Can you hear me well? First, I want to thank you for inviting me to this incredibly hopeful event. I can engage with young students and also my fellow scholars. So without further ado, I think students are the center here. So I want to offer my just humble and little insight to each of the students I had the privilege to read and engage. I actually wrote a letter for each of you, so I'm going to just include it in the beautiful certificate. So what I'm going to offer now is just maybe just a brief summary version of my feedback, more likely my appreciation. So let me see. I'm going to start with Larissa. So I need to wear my reading glasses. I want to thank you for your deeply thoughtful and moving poster on the Catholic Timorese resistance. Reading your book, I felt not just a scholarly appreciation, but a sense of kinship as someone who also comes from a history marked by collective suffering, faith, and the struggle for dignity. So your project speaks to far more than a historical event for me. It captures how faith, when embodied in communal resilience and struggle, becomes a living force for justice and hope. And I think one of the greatest strengths of your work is the way you clearly articulate the Catholic Church's multifaceted role, not merely as a spiritual authority, but as a source of sanctuary, international advocacy, and moral leadership. And you skillfully connect theological principles like human dignity, solidarity, and preferential option for the poor with the lived experience of East Timorese Catholics. I also loved the organization and visual structure of my poster. I found it really beautiful. And just a little insight, if you were to continue developing this work, I would probably gently encourage you to explore even more the voices from the grassroots, the testimonies of ordinary Timorese Catholics whose daily acts of courage sustained the spirit of resistance. And their stories, alongside the institutional church's actions, would add even greater depth to your already powerful narrative. Overall, I just appreciate your work. It is an act of remembrance and solidarity, and bringing to light a history that is too often marginalized. You are contributing meaningfully to the memory of those who carried hope under the most brutal conditions. So I just want to thank you. Thank you so much, Larissa.
Larissa, if you would go up and we have a certificate for you.
Thank you, Mina. Especially because I also resonate with kind of finding the hope with you all, and so it was very inspiring as a project, but also seeing how all of you identified in such a strong way personally, but also within the mission of your life and the work that you are doing, even though it doesn't have to be your context to gain and glimpse solidarity and kinship. So thank you for that. And the fact that you picked really hard context, really hard, meaning visceral, difficult spaces to understand and glean hope from, right? It was not something, as I was reading your projects, you had to labor to find it. You had to really understand what hope was in order to find it in a way that it is something that's ongoing, right? That is part of the struggle and the celebration, that it is not a culmination of the struggle, but an ongoing strength of animation. And so I want to begin with Anabel Tornio's project, the Vicariate of Solidarity, a beacon of hope in Pinochet's Chile. you in this project shows what it means for the church to leverage their power and position. And I think that that was a very strong throughout your presentation, your poster, the ways in which you talk about sanctuary and care and pastorate. So it was not just only the work around the political and public participation, but also what was the type of pastoral care that was given by these communities. And I think that's something that also I wanted to highlight was the fact that this was a project and an initiative needed for one specific period of time, and it was the also highlighting how this movement realized that it was not needed any longer, right? And so the ways in which an organization is able to give and coordinate and give what it needs and then transform into something else. So it doesn't, the becoming is to respond to a need, not for its own survival, right? And so how it now exists as a memory and as a work in maintaining and not forgetting, but also being able to move forward, also being able to continue the work of solidarity and how it was transformed in this project. And so I found that very encouraging, and also the ways that you highlight spes non confundits, God's judgment will be based on love. And so what does it mean to do the work based on love? Because the judgment is based on the love that we give. And so the ways that you connected the work, the solidarity, the theology, the pastoral care, it was very inspiring. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill and your team, for inviting me to be part of this. And thank you very much. I had 3 students, all of them working on a project in Africa. There's some common elements that I noticed as I went through the projects, and that's what I'm going to be speaking about in relation to each one of them. But first of all, the kind of overarching number of elements that are kind of common in the project. The sense of personal journey, I think that's very, very important, that this was a class project, but there is a personal journey that each one of them brought to it that has a connection with their own life and story. Secondly, the way all these projects illumine the hope in the midst of such a horrible events like genocide in Rwanda, in Burundi, civil war in Sudan, hope in the midst of darkness. And thirdly, I've been impressed, super impressed by the passion with which all of you 3 spoke and explained your project. You could really see the deep, passionate involvement into the project. It looks like you picked a project, but in the end the project picked you and kind of drew you deeper and deeper into it, and that all of you are speaking about the next step to the project. So anyway, let me just now go one by one, beginning with Julia Kamenske. Incredible work on Maggie Barankis, not just a teacher, but a mother. This woman in Burundi who survived genocide and now has raised over 30,000 children. And Julia, in speaking about this, I was always kind of careful to say, why did you get interested in this? And all of them say, there's this crazy teacher called the Kavanaugh class and the word Catholicism. But as I kept wondering, you say, but why particularly this? So Julia talks about her being a teacher herself, and so really working with the children. And so she kind of, when she read the story of Maggie Baranki, so she identified with her and wanted to learn more what a woman like her, what keeps her going. And the more she learned about her, the more she discovered these incredible stories of hope, that she's raising these kids in the midst of hatred, in the midst of so much violence. So, but the personal is there, and then talking about what next. She thinks, yeah, I'd like to do more. I would like to research more actually about this woman, and perhaps I can do another project that involves her, because there is so much that inspires about this Maggie Barankise. And what she describes as really hope in the midst of this darkness, that many instances and stories that she is able to capture of Maggie's own involvement and activity and work in the midst of so many difficult conditions and situations, raising up these children. From her, get inspired by a sense of hope as work, hope as struggle, hope as engagement, hope as never giving up. The sentiment that she captures about Maggie, that love has made me an inventor. And so Maggie keeps inventing, and so not giving up on that. That is very, very, very clear, that. And as I said, she being herself drawn deeper into that and feeling that she needs to do more research on this. This was just the tip of the iceberg. There is more that she wants to learn, and I'm not surprised that she's going to do another project, perhaps even a final class project. And if she goes on to do a master's, maybe a master's thesis on Maggie Barankise, but I would not be surprised that she would get on the plane to go to Kigali and visit Maggie Barankise. So congratulations, Julia, such a wonderful work. Please come forward.
Next, I'm going to offer my feedback to Devin. Your poster on Catholicism and Hope in Vietnam is a beautiful and thoughtful project, and beautifully structured, and not only present an important but often overlooked historical narrative, but also powerfully to the resilience of faith in the midst of violence, displacement, and political rupture. The significance of your project touched me personally as well, coming from the Korean Catholic tradition, where generations also endured brutal waves of persecution in the 19th centuries. I felt a profound sense of connection with the story you presented. The Catholic communities in many parts of the world have known what it means to hold on to faith under crushing conditions, and your work beautifully captures how hope can survive and even grow stronger amid suffering. I also appreciate the balance you maintain between political and religious dimensions, particularly in your discussion of Catholic privilege under GM's government. Still, if I can just gently encourage you to take one step further, I had a brief interaction with Devin, and she was like, I have been always interested in Vietnam and learning more about Vietnamese history. And I know that you're not going to stop here. So I know you have intellectual brilliance and resilience as well to continue. I thought about maybe critically exploring how Catholicism's entanglement with the colonial and Cold War power structures shaped both its perceptions and its internal tensions. For example, how did the Catholic communities themselves wrestle with being aligned willingly or unwillingly with the colonial and authoritarian regimes? Were there dissenting Catholic voices that resisted or challenged these political entanglements, as we have seen in other contexts during the Vietnam War and beyond? And how about the future of Catholicism in its relationship with other faith traditions? And how the Catholic Church in Vietnam is engaging and will be engaging in broader societal healing today, particularly through interreligious dialogues with the Buddhist communities, and so on. Engaging such complexities does not diminish the resilience you so beautifully highlight, Rather, I believe it deepens the witness by showing that true hope does not deny struggle, but grows through honest reflection. Like Vietnam, Korea too carries the legacy of a colonial past, in which the Catholic Church sometimes stood at an uneasy crossroads between protection and complicity. I have come to believe that it is precisely in facing these difficult histories honestly that grace becomes visible, not by denying the shadows, but by allowing the light of truth and healing to emerge through them. So thank you again for your excellent moving work. It is the kind of the project that not only informs, but also invites deeper reflection intellectually, theologically, and personally, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Next, I have Jesse Arroyo. Where are you, Jesse? Oh, you just went to class. Okay. Should I make the remarks still?
Sure, you can abbreviate.
Well, I can abbreviate. I deeply appreciable the fact that like stories are now part of you and they continue to shape us. And so I think that his poster and work was very deeply theological in the ways that he paired the figures and the aspect of martyrdom, but also scripture. And one question that he began with was, what good comes out of hope when there is all the suffering and misery, right? And another question was, at the end still, what, especially looking at the lives of these men who have been murdered, what good can come from the violence? And so for me, the theological flip would be asking what good can come still from the work, instead of asking what good can come from the violence, right? In Spanish, there's a saying que no hay mal que por bien no venga, ni bien que su mal no traiga. There's no good that can come from evil, nor evil that can come from good. And so kind of being able to flip a little the ways in which sometimes we center violence, and then what are the other things that we need to center in order for something new to arise. And I think that he is doing that work in understanding contemporary and current issues around martyrdom.
The next project I looked at was by Seth, where you can also see the same personal journey and the interest, but also hope in the midst of darkness, as well as the passion and the what next question. So Seth worked on this priest from Sudan, Bishop Paridi Taban, and the Holy Trinity Peace Village. Again, I asked Seth, why worked on this? Why did you get interested in this? And he said, I wanted to work on the Sudan. I said, why Sudan? Well, it was in the news. Okay. And then, yeah, but the more I looked at them, the more I could also see there's so much fighting, even here. So much, he didn't use the word, but so much tribalism. Here, polarization, and the more that Seth worked on the story of Paridi Taban, the more I could see that it is possible actually to bring people together across divides. And so I think that is what kept him going to work on this project, which is done in a very comprehensive way, capturing the story of Paridi Taban, this bishop in South Sudan, who built a village, a peace village in a marginalized community, bringing together warring tribes to live together, to grow crops together, to raise families together in a cooperative arrangement. And he named it Holy Trinity Peace Village. And so it says, it's a flame. It uses the image of the flame, and there are three logs to the flame, and these are the three persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So you could feel the kind of the deep engagement with the theological vision that is behind the Holy Trinity Peace Village. But the thing that came through very, very strongly in the write-up, but also as he's communicating with passion, the sense of hope. The number of times he says, it is possible to have hope. It is possible to live together across divides. I feel that is a key takeaway. And he himself also says that he's been drawn deeper into the kind of vision that Paridi Taban bears out. And I'm sure he will also want to do more research, and who knows where the project is going to lead. So thank you again, Seth, for this wonderful work, and best wishes as you carry forward.
My last, but certainly not least, presenters is Maro. And I want to express how deeply meaningful and encouraging your poster, Hope and Resilience for Indonesian Catholics, is. You have chosen a topic of a profound importance and approached it with care, clarity, and a hopeful spirit. Your work succeeds in illuminating not only the historical and ongoing challenges faced by Catholics in Indonesia, but also the concrete ways in which communities have cultivated resilience through grassroots initiatives, interfaith cooperation, and a shared commitment to human dignity. The significance of your project, I believe, resonates powerfully with the needs of our time. In a world where religious, cultural, and political divisions are increasingly weaponized, your work reminds us that hope is not an abstract ideal, but a lived relational practice. It shows that interfaith dialogue is not merely a polite option, but a vital necessity for the survival of our shared humanity. In doing so, your poster offers a hopeful counter-narrative to the despair and cynicism that so often dominate global discourse about religion today. You have not only produced an excellent academic poster, you have also extended a much-needed invitation to imagine new ways of living together. One of the greatest strengths of your work lies in your focus on practical and human-centered examples. The case studies like Banyu Yurid and Pope Francis' visit, the kind of hope you described, you demonstrated has a human face, which gives us a real hope. At the same time, your project wisely does not shy away from acknowledging the realities of discrimination and violence that minority communities still face. So yeah, your work balanced the treatment of both the challenges and possibilities is one of its strongest academic and ethical contributions. So yeah, your poster is beautiful and timely and necessary piece of scholarship and witness in a time when fear and division often feel louder than understanding and cooperation. So I just want to thank you, Maro.
Next poster is Hope Through Environmental Justice by Sefi Favela. Sefi, was a joy to meet you and get to talk to you, and especially thinking about a topic that it is so looming because it impacts each and every one of us. And so the passion and love and desire that you have to work for this environment and the ways in which you pair your faith with this work is inspiring. It is unwavering, right? In the face of constant needing to push back against systems that seem to be larger than life. but that you have that passion and that love for it that will sustain you and give you strength. And so in thinking, I can't not see the connections between the posters and the ways that the theologies of hope are weaving it together. And so thinking about that, we will be judged by the love that we give, and the love that you give in this project, the love that you give in this work is so powerful and important and inspiring. You gave such a rich understanding of the environment, but you also gave such good case studies on this is the real lives of people and the ways in which they have to deal with the aftermath of when these companies leave these places. So it doesn't just happen in Latin America, it happens in so many other places where they are extractive zones, right? And so how do you work with that? How do you engage with that? And the working and learning more about Iglesias y Minería was really helpful, because then you got to see how not just a church, but different collaboration happens in a public space that is very much also faith-driven, and it's that commitment. And as I shared earlier, I think it's a very powerful and important focus that you do, and the figure of Mary and how Mary looks at its children, Mary's children, with compassion. So how does also Mary look at the earth with compassion, and the analogy and the understanding or the theological grounding of Mother Earth? So who is Mary to earth in terms of that relationship? What is Mary interceding for on behalf of the children, right? And so thank you so much for this work and such a passion and joy for what you're doing. Congratulations.
The last poster I looked at was by Jules, Cisneros. Jules, it was a pleasure and honor to meet you. I have to say, I have not met so many young students, freshmen, who have the clarity and the focus about their work, about their vision, as you do have. And part of it rises out of your own personal journey, the events in your family that kind of really drive you to a restlessness about hope. Where is hope? And the way that you have already committed yourself in so many ways to being a voice of hope in your communities at this early age. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that led you to really study this topic of genocide, which is a huge and dark topic. But also you mentioned that, of course, you are also a student and you had a class in International Criminal Court of Justice. That's where you first learned about this genocide. And you had all the theories, but it did not make sense until you went to Rwanda for those 10 days with the class. And then the whole reality of the genocide unfolded before you as you visited the museum, the memorials, and those historical sites, but also as you met survivors and heard stories. So this personal journey, in a way, is behind what you try to capture in your poster on the genocide, a sense of tragedy, a sense of darkness, but also a sense of hope. So you try to trace hope in the midst of such a horrendous event like the genocide. First of all, your own study of the genocide of Rwanda, the events that led to the genocide, the theories is quite impressive. It was clear in what you wrote, but also in the conversation that we had, the clear grasp of the facts leading up to the genocide, the details of that, and details are important, but also your discovery of the various signs of hope, where you can find hope in such a horrific event, hope in the community, hope in the stories of forgiveness that you capture, hope in the court system, the Gacaca court system, and the International Tribunal Court of Justice, hope in so many dimensions. But I like especially how you end by saying that, quoting Pope Francis, hope does not disappoint. that even in the midst of uncertainties, there is hope. Obviously, you're talking about the genocide, this huge, big historical world event, but I feel in many ways you are talking about your own personal journey. And but also I can see how you have been really drawn deeper and deeper into this project, and how you mentioned that you are a student of film, television, and you are actually thinking about doing a documentary on Rwanda and the genocide. Just quite impressive. I've learned so much from you, and I want to thank you for the work that you put in presenting this beautiful poster. Thank you, Jules.
Last but most certainly not least, Isabella Zusco. Yes. Thank you so much for your work and your poster. It was so rich, and I think that informative in a way that it is so practical for today in terms of how to understand nonviolent movements and the complexity of holding it in a particular space and regime where such precarity to people's safety is at play. And so the title was Fighting Against an Oppressive Regime. She was looking at Sebastian Acevedo movement against torture, and just the ways in which in the history you also made it a point to give strategies of what they were doing today during the time of Pinochet's regime in Chile, but also things that can be useful today to understand not just how to engage long-term in the work of resistance, but also kind of seeing the work of faith and also the work of entering into partnerships with all of the different organizations that enter into partnership with each other to not just provide resistance, but also provide safety for each other. And so I'm thinking about as I mentioned to you, the concept of nonviolence and how to hold that intention with self-immolation, how to hold that intention with violence in itself, even if it's towards oneself. And you wrote, hope maintains the strength, right? So what does it mean to maintain the strength in a movement that is fighting and struggling against oppression, against the erasure of people, and against the erasure of resistance? And how your focus was, yes, the story and the history, but also, again, the strategy of the movement was very helpful. And something that I was thinking about, how the ways in which the diversity within a space, how faith and what is understood as the root of justice brings people together. So how do we think through, even today, how do we think through practices that bring us together for the common good, right? For the purpose of flourishing, for the purpose of liberation. And so I think about, and a question that I want to leave you is, how do we practice, or what are the practices of one's belief look like in the public sphere for the common good? Thank you so much.